Welcome. If you seek truth, the truth shall set you free. Fear not. And now the agenda with Crystal Risotti.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the agenda with Crystal Risotti. I'm the host, Crystal, and tonight we're going to be talking about a Change of Plans-Detrans. That's the title of today's episode, and I'm going to be sharing a lot of information with you over the next few episodes. This is going to be part 1, talking about gender detransitioning, and then I have a part 2 already planned for the next episode, and we'll see where we get from there. One thing about this, I felt like it was really important to share this now because we've already talked about gender ideology. We've talked about some of the social culture influences on our kids and our society, and that promote the LGBTQ plus agenda, but also transgenderism. And so now I feel like I want to talk about detrans for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm not sure if you follow that or not, but the information I want to share with you, it's disheartening. It's sad. My goal is that it will maybe touch somebody who's considering transgenderism, either socially or medically, and that it will shed some light on what detransition looks like, because it often takes years for somebody who's transitioned to start to feel like they need to detransition. And it's pretty rampant, actually, more so than you know, because nobody follows the detrans people. What do I mean by that? They're going to clinics, they're getting transgender treatments. Could be hormones, could have been surgical, could have been, whatever. They're getting these treatments, and then when they decide they're not comfortable with it anymore, they just stop going to these clinics. And so nobody has been really following up with them. We're starting to see studies that are looking into it more and actually trying to identify how many people are actually detransitioning and what their motivations are and what the factors are. So we're starting to see that. I find it interesting that in our society, we often hear, "You don't accept me for who I am." We hear that from people who claim to be transgender. My point is, they're not accepting themselves for who they are. I would push back and say, I accept you for who you were born as. I accept you for who you are. You're not accepting who you are. You're creating a fantasy of who you want to be. And let's dive into that. Let's find out why. Let's find out what your thoughts are and what's motivating you to do that. So I just wanted to mention that. So in the past, I've mentioned that children are impressionable, and I keep repeating this concept because I want to drill it in. I want you guys to really get it. Children are impressionable. They're presented with seeds from exposure to things. So seeds get planted in their minds, and then somehow they could be exposed to it again, or for whatever reason, the seeds get watered and they start to grow. They become thoughts. And those thoughts get entertained, and those thoughts can then turn into actions. Kids are curious. They're also obsessive when they're learning about something. So you plant a seed of something, and they get curious about it, and they'll do deep dives on it like we do and try to learn everything they can about it. Well, then it can become ingrained in them, a belief system, and then can turn into actions. Does it always? No. I'm never coming at this from an absolute. I hope everybody understands that. My motivation in this is sharing the information so that you're armed with it, so that you know what to look for. And that's it. Mostly around kids. My concern is mostly for the kids. They're innocent and they can't make decisions for themselves. But in the detransition space, you'll find there's sad stories on adults too. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Why is there such an increase in gender dysphoria? Let me ask you that. Do you know? There is a big increase in it. It's higher for female to male now than it is for male to female. And historically, in the beginning, it was always higher for male to female transitioning. Now that's shifted. Why is that? Have you thought about it? And what are the factors that contribute to that? In this episode, we're going to look into all of that. We're going to talk about it. And I'm hoping you're watching this even if you don't have an interest in the transgenderism or the detransitioners. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied tonight for some reason. I'm hoping you're watching it anyway, because chances are, with it increasing at the rate it's increasing, basically doubling every year, you're going to know somebody who's in this boat. You might already know somebody who's in this boat. You might know somebody but not know it because they're not presenting yet, but you're seeing signs. And so these are the reasons why I want to arm you with this information, so you can have an intelligible conversation with somebody if you run across this. We're going to take a look at the psychological professionals as well and see what they're saying about it. And I, again, hope that it will at least make people pause for a minute and think about what they're doing, what they're allowing their kids exposure to, what they're doing in their lives. So with that, let's start with some Bible verses. And these are ones that I've talked about in the last episode. I'm going to bring them up again because it still applies. Romans 12:2. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. 2 Corinthians 10:5, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, which I think transgenderism and detransgenderism does exactly that, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Remember, I said thoughts can turn into actions if we sit and entertain them enough. We can make ourselves believe anything. We can look at the front door of our house and tell ourselves over time that we're afraid to leave our house because there's crime out there and we might get shot. And eventually we're going to believe it. We can talk ourselves into things. We can also talk ourselves out of things. All right, on the same token, we really need to guard our minds. Philippians 2:5, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. I can guarantee you that Jesus didn't have thoughts in his mind about maybe he was transgender or anything like that. We need to have the same mind that he had. Our concern should not be for temporal things of this world, and certainly not self-absorbed, which I also believe this whole transgender movement and LGBTQ plus movement, I believe they're very self-absorbed belief systems. Proverbs 23:7, for as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Again, that goes back to, what are we allowing ourselves to entertain in our thoughts? What are we allowing ourselves to obsess over? And is that healthy? So let's go to slide 2. We talked about these in the past, but I'm going to keep bringing them up because I want to drill them in. This is stuff that we're seeing in our culture from the communist goals that are affecting us now. Been in place for well before 1963 when they were read into our congressional record, if you're watching this for the first time. They've existed well before that, and they've had decades to try to implement these. So I'm going to keep bringing them up every time they apply to a topic that we're discussing, because I want to drill them in and make sure you understand how clear it is that what we're seeing in our society was intentional, and the intent was to break down our society. So let's look at goal 25. The communist goal said break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Goal number 26 is present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Let's go to the next slide. Slide 30, or goal 32 says support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture, meaning education, social agencies, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc. Goal 39, dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals. So again, these are painting the picture, and this is how you deconstruct a society. These are definitely things that have been going on. Let's go to slide 5. So let's talk about what is gender dysmorphia. This is a DSM code that exists, that is a standard that is to be followed in the psychiatric arena. So let's see what they define it as. The DSM-5-TR defines gender dysphoria in children, so I focused on that in this slide, as a marked incongruence between one's experienced or expressed gender and assigned gender lasting at least 6 months, as manifested by at least 6 of the following, one of which may be the first criterion. So let's look at these 6 things they're saying in children they're supposed to manifest in order to know if they have gender dysphoria. Number 1, a strong desire to be of the other gender, or an insistence that one is the other gender, or some alternative gender different from one's assigned gender. Number 2, in boys assigned gender, a strong preference for cross-dressing or simulating female attire, or in girls assigned gender, a strong preference for wearing only typical masculine clothing and a strong resistance to the wearing of typical feminine clothing. I know so many young kids like this. Number 3, a strong preference for cross-gender roles in make-believe play or fantasy play. This can be in video games or physically also. The next one, a strong preference for the toys, games, or activities stereotypically used or engaged in by the other gender. The next one, a strong preference for playmates of the other gender. The next one, in boys assigned gender, a strong rejection of typically masculine toys, games, and activities, and a strong avoidance of rough and tumble play. Or in girls assigned gender, a strong rejection of typically feminine toys, games, and activities. The next one, a strong dislike of one's sexual anatomy. And the next one says a strong desire for the physical sex characteristics that match one's experienced gender. A couple of things about this. Define strong preference. I'll wait. What does that mean? It could mean something different to everyone who works in this field. To one person, a strong preference, which is repeated throughout this, or a strong desire, could be them just saying that. This goes back to who defines it, who sets the standard, who are the people behind this defining these and setting these up. We call them experts, but my husband likes to say, and I love it, what do you call a medical student who finishes last in their studies? Doctor. We don't know who these people are. We don't know about them. We just trust the experts, and look where that got us last time. Recently. I'll just leave it at that. Right, Josh? Right. We won't go into all that. But anyways, there are so many things on this list that I think are normal for some kids. It doesn't mean they're transgender. I didn't like wearing dresses when I was little. I was forced to. I was out playing outside in the dirt with the boys in the neighborhood and racing them and climbing trees and all that stuff. I was horrified at puberty. Horrified. But, as you grow older, you learn to embrace it. It's all right. I made it through. I ended up kind of liking who I ended up being. It was fun there for a while. Now I'm old and, whatever. But yeah, so in talking about these things, I just want you to notice, it's kind of like when I looked at a pamphlet one time for ADD, because the school was telling me my son might have it. I looked at the symptoms on the back, because I always go to that, right, first. Because their explanation to me about him having ADD, the only explanation I got was he was holding 3 crayons with one hand, riding with the other and chewing on his shirt. And I said, that's called multitasking, and my work pays big money to teach grown-ups how to do that. Don't worry about it. So I got a pamphlet. I'm looking at the symptoms. I start passing it around to people at work and saying, what do you think about these? Because what I noticed is I have all that, like a touch of all that. And everybody I talked to said the same thing. They were not eccentric symptoms. They were things that you go through in life, just things that happen, moods that change or whatever. There wasn't anything illuminating about the symptoms list that they gave me. It was literally things that everybody experiences at one point or another. And that's how I feel about this list. Okay, let's go to slide 6. So what do they say the treatment is for it? They say support may include open-ended exploration of their feelings and experiences of gender identity and expression without the therapist having any predefined gender identity or expression outcome defined as preferable to another. Okay, we all have a bias going into things. We can't ignore that. We're human. That's what happens. But here they're saying these therapists cannot have a bias. They can't acknowledge that you present as a female. They can't acknowledge that you present as a male. They can't even do that. Tell me, realistically, one person who can do that. Nobody can do that. But yet they're saying it. Psychological attempts to force a transgender person to be cisgender, sometimes referred to as gender identity conversion efforts or so-called gender identity conversion therapy, are considered unethical and have been linked to adverse mental health outcomes. If you don't know, what they're saying here is if you as a therapist try to work with, I'm going to stay focused on children because that's my passion. If you as a therapist are trying to find out why this child thinks they're transgender or have gender identity issues or gender dysphoria, if you're exploring that and not just affirming what they're telling you, then that could cause adverse mental health outcomes. It could cause them to be sad. It could cause them to be depressed. It could cause them to commit suicide. So this is where we get the gender affirmation therapy. That's the big push now. This is according to the psychology associations. You're not supposed to question people because it could cause them more distress. You're just supposed to affirm them. That's where this comes from. To me, it's a form of child abuse because children need adults to lead them. They need guidance. They need structure. They need investigation when they're feeling a certain way. You have to look into it. You have to find the root cause, for Pete's sake. We have a whole industry of quality assurance, which is what I work in, that is all about root cause analysis, all about it. So any problem that comes up, we have fishbone diagrams. We have all these different formulas that you can use to get to the root cause of something. But yet in this industry, you're not supposed to do that. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's infuriating. Why would you not want to do that with the most precious, vulnerable population we have? Why would you not want to do that? It doesn't stand up. So I just wanted to point that out in this slide. I think the last paragraph is probably a pretty good one to look at too. Family and societal rejection of gender identity are some of the strongest predictors of mental health difficulties among people who are transgender. That's a very bold statement to make. They're saying basically that these therapists need to be very concerned if the family isn't affirmative of the gender identity of their child. That's scary. And that's why we're seeing kids getting taken away from their families by the state. Because a lot of times these are state employees, could be DCS, could be licensed social workers that work for the state. It could be, whatever, but CPS is usually involved when a therapist sees that a family is not supportive. We in Indiana had one case of that already. There have been many cases in other states as well because they see it as a danger to the child. There's a common theme with the with the jab. I'll just leave it at that. With the emergency use authorization on the jab, there's a common theme between that and this. And what I'm seeing is they're justifying it by saying the benefits outweigh the risks. They did that with the jab, and they're doing it with this. And my point is that dismisses the risks. And again, who makes that decision? Because 1 out of 1,000 people, let's say, died from that jab. You could say the benefits outweigh the risks unless you're that one person who died's family, right? To me, it's more about the level of risk than it is about there being risks. All right, so let's look at slide 7. Challenges and complications. And again, this is according to psychiatry.org. All these slides so far have been from that. Transgender people suffer from high levels of stigmatization, discrimination, and victimization, contributing to negative self-image and increased rates of other mental health disorders. Transgender individuals are at a higher risk of victimization and hate crimes than the general public. Suicide rates among transgender people are markedly higher than the general population. Like this paragraph. Transgender children and adolescents are often victims of bullying and discrimination at school, which can contribute to serious adverse mental health outcomes. And interventions are often needed to create safe and affirming school environments. There's that affirming word again. Transgender individuals may also face challenges in accessing appropriate health care and insurance coverage of related services. Again, we're in the gender affirmation mode. Don't question it. Just push full steam ahead with it and treat these people accordingly. We don't care what caused it. We don't care what the factors are that contributed to it. We don't care what the correlations are. We really don't care what the causation is either. We just push full steam ahead in trying to address it. I can tell you for a fact the U.S. is the one that's pushing full steam ahead with this. Europe, a lot of the European countries have pulled back on it. And we talked about that in a previous episode. So if you haven't watched it, go back and watch. All right, let's go to slide 8. This is DSM-4, so the version before. And again, the DSM is the diagnosis manual. So it has the diagnosis codes and all of that kind of thing. We're on version 5 now. This is the prior version. And I pulled it up because I wanted to point out, so now it's called gender dysmorphia or dysphoria. Sorry, they're both a thing. DSM-4, though, called it a gender identity disorder. So in this latest version, they changed the name of it. Does that matter? Could, because there's always a connotation you draw from the words, right? So it could. I'm not sure. Some experts are saying it does matter. So let's look at what DSM-4 said as gender identity disorder. A strong and persistent cross-gender identification, not merely a desire for any perceived cultural advantages of being the other sex. That's a lot more specific than the one that we just read from DSM-5 that's the updated version, don't you think? Because it's saying not merely a desire, it's excluding that. Whereas the DSM-5 doesn't have exclusions at all. It doesn't talk about any correlations or deep diving into it or trying to figure it out. Here, at least they're classifying it and saying if they're merely having a desire for cultural advantages of being the other sex, exclude that out. That doesn't fit here. And I find that to be far more descriptive than the DSM-5 that they made a lot more generic to cover a lot of things. This says in children, the disturbance is manifested by 4 or more of the following. Number 1, repeatedly stated desire to be or insistence that he or she is the other sex. Number 2, in boys, preference for cross-dressing or simulating female attire. In girls, insistence on wearing only stereotypical masculine clothing. Do you see what they did here? If you go back to the slide before, look at the difference. In that third bullet or second bullet, it says in boys, and they put assigned gender in parentheses. And they do the same with girls, assigned gender, because now they define your gender as assigned at birth so that they can have the 150 some genders, so that you can identify as anything on the menu. Before, and this is just demonstrating the recent history changes, they clearly showed in boys and in girls. It was limited to the 2 sexes / genders. So it was the same thing. And they've changed it in the new upgraded version. Number 3, strong and persistent preferences for cross-sex roles in make-believe play or persistent fantasies of being the other sex. Number 4, intense desire to participate in the stereotypical games and pastimes of the other sex. Number 5, strong preference for playmates of the other sex. And then B says persistent discomfort with his or her sex or sense of inappropriateness in the gender role of that sex. C says the disturbance is not concurrent with a physical intersex condition. Did you see DSM-5 took that out? And then we look at D. The disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Again, who's calling the shots on that? Who's making that decision? Clinically significant distress. Again, that article is from psychnews.psychiatryonline.org. You can see the references in the bottom. You can go back and look at these yourself and compare and contrast them, because there are some big differences between DSM-4 and 5. Okay, now we're going to move on to Reddit, which I hate being on Reddit because it's not friendly to folks like me. I disagree with most of the stuff on it. But in order to bring you the information you need and to maintain objectivity, I make it a point to go check out Reddit on regular basis on certain pages like subreddits that I subscribe to, because I want to stay current with those topics. And I want to see what the culture is saying. We have a problem usually with following our bubble people and our bubble news and our bubble preferred sources. We don't naturally like to step outside of that. I feel like it's important for me to step outside of it because I do really strive to see things from the other side as well and think through it and do critical thinking about it. And I think you can't fight an enemy you don't know. And so I want to know what's being said on the other side. Let's look at slide 9. This is a Reddit post that I found was interesting. I wanted to share with you. This is somebody on Reddit that said it's important to differentiate what society wants us to be versus what we can be for ourselves. If you like feminine things, but it's looked down on in your environment, you can do it for yourself at home or try looking just a bit androgynous. We are taught that to be valuable, we have those 2 options, being a masculine man or a feminine woman. Okay, I have to stop there because that doesn't mean you're valuable. Subscribing to being a man or subscribing to being a woman is accepting yourself for who you are. It doesn't mean you're more valuable to society. I think that's really a stretch, but it's also demonstrating how a lot of these people think. That's why I want to share it with you. Let's go back to slide 9. About half or midway through, it says, it's ingrained in our subconscious, but over time, it's possible to let go of it and just live somewhere in the middle. Many people are at least mentally androgynous, but fit into society's expectations externally. So many people fall into the trans rabbit hole because they deep inside feel that they must be one or the other to have value, or that they dislike some things society connects to their sex. We should try making changes in the society to shift the paradigm and show that being a woman or a man doesn't have to bind you to do or look a certain way, and it's okay. Best of luck. So that was a quote from somebody who posted on there. Again, I'm going to step back a minute. Society didn't define man and woman, God did. Okay, so let's quit giving credit to society for defining men and women. God defined men and women and their function. And again, like I said before, they fit together nicely and they complement each other. And that's why he made them the way he did. All right, he made man first, and then he saw that man could use a helpmeet, a partner. So he created woman from man, not from the dust and dirt necessarily, but from man. So she is a build off, an extension of the man. And that was by design. So I get irritated by seeing society's expectations. But on the other hand, society is the one that said girls like pink and dolls and boys like trucks and blue. That is not found in the Bible whatsoever. It's not a biblical concept. So they're right in a way because society defined that. What do we see happening in society all the time? I've seen it so many times on a big level. Let's create a problem and then let's swoop in with the solution to fix the problem so that we get what we want in the end. Okay, so they go in with a plan. This is where we want to be next year. How do we get society to buy into that? Because it's an encroachment on their freedom, perhaps. Well, we create a problem, and then our solution achieves the plan. And we look like the savior at the end of the day. Seen that on a big scale lately. How about you, Josh? So it's the same with the society. When I say society, I'm going to say, and this may offend some people, I'm going to say that people who are not, they're not children of God. And I don't believe everybody's a child of God. The children of God are the people who have accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior. They've become the children of God. The people who haven't are not. And you can pray all you want to, it ain't going nowhere. If you're not a Bible-believing Christian, if you're not a saved, born-again Christian. So when I say society, I'm talking about that unsaved, worldly, carnal group of people. Okay, so I'm not talking about people who have been saved. I'm talking about the worldly, carnal side of society. It can also be some people who were saved that still live that way. You know, that's a whole nother discussion. But generally speaking, I'm talking about the unsaved in society, which I feel like is a lot of people. Society did come up with that type of description of male and female. And now we have this progressive view of how to fix the problem. Although it's not fixing the problem, it's introducing new problems, and we'll see that as we go along. Also, that part of society, their father isn't God, which means their father's the devil. And that is a satanic, Luciferian way of controlling society. So that's my 2 cents worth, and you may disagree. And if you do, that's fine. We don't have to agree. Next slide, slide 10. This one is somebody else posting that said, I'm just speaking from experience, but I know I'm also on the autistic spectrum. And we talked about this in the gender ideology episode about the connection between the autism spectrum disorders and the transgenderism and the draw to LGBTQ+. Also, it says, I'm actually a special ed teacher now as well, and it's really common for kids on the autism spectrum to love, what are we talking about here? Anime and cartoons that borrow in style It's generally the large eyes and the melodramatic monologues that make it very easy for me and people like me to pick up on emotional cues and actually tell how people are feeling instead of just guess like I normally do. I don't know how much it applies here, but I remember reading once that apparently it's more common for people on the autistic spectrum to be trans. That's why I did the anime and manga series, that episode. There is a definite connection between people on the autism spectrum disorders list and the draw to these things. We're starting to see studies coming out proving it. They're long delayed, behind the 8 ball there, but we're starting to see it. Okay, let's go to slide 11. This is another person commenting. It's true, and my belief is that these people did not fit in with their respected gender and were seen as outcast. Therefore, they have a poor taste for their own gender and seek affirmation out where they weren't able to find worth and value with their own gender. I'm seeing that too, and that's a sad part to me because I know kids like this. They were misfits, outcasts, they didn't fit in, they weren't sports kids, they were gamers, or they were emo or gothic back in the day, goths. But they were outcast kind of kids, and so they're looking for a way to fit in, and they're finding community with other people like them. So that's interesting to me. Let's look at slide 12. I also hate how if you search up anime and gender dysphoria, it just says that anime helps us discover our true identity. I warned you about that stuff in that episode. It's not all of it. If adults are into it, I don't care, but parents and grandparents, please guard your kids' minds. They slide this stuff in where you don't expect it, and you have to stay on top of it. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the Tavistock Clinic. That's slide 13. The Tavistock Clinic was the only gender identity clinic in the UK. We'll read about it here in a second. The Tavistock Gender Clinic will be closed this year. This is an old article. It is the UK's only gender clinic for children and young people. The National Health Service ordered the clinic to close after a whistleblower, Kira Bell, said that she was not challenged enough before the clinic put her into affirmative hormone blocker treatment. Dr. Hilary Cass said the clinic left children at considerable risk of poor mental health issues and distress, and that there was inconclusive evidence to back up their clinical decision-making. Okay, so Kira Bell was rushed through gender affirmation treatments as a minor. Now she's grown, she's detransitioned, and she sued the Tavistock Clinic and won. When the UK did an investigation into the Tavistock Clinic, they found major deficiencies with their approach, and their records and so on. So the government of UK closed the Tavistock Clinic down. Now, it was supposed to close, I believe, in 2023, and it was delayed. It actually closed down in March of this year. But all along, I kept celebrating that the Tavistock Clinic was closing. Yay, woohoo. And that was a catalyst for a lot of European countries to realize through that investigation, they started to realize the problems with just affirming gender and pushing these kids through the process. So it started the other European countries down a path of investigations as well. And several of those countries have now nixed gender affirming care. They want therapy, intense therapy for these people before they rush them into treatments. However, trick on me, I found an article with the BBC, a follow-up article that talks about how 2 new hubs were opened. So they closed the Tavistock Clinic and they instead opened 2 new hubs. So it's not gone. The work isn't gone. It was just delayed, apparently, because they had such a huge waiting list and they had so many clients. And these articles will be in the references that you can read about it. But one of the things is that they've seen a huge boom increase in people wanting transgender services, and they didn't have enough people to service them. That's the reason for the waiting list. It's also part of the reason for the push them into treatment and bypass the intense therapy. So now, instead of the Tavistock clinic, they've got 2 actual other locations and more staff to handle it. So it's sort of a win because they backed off the gender affirmation therapy train. They got off of it, but they're still doing the treatments. Okay, slide 14. This is from that same article in the BBC.com, and it states Dr. Cass says that the largest group of patients now referred to as GIDS are teenagers. GIDS, by the way, is Gender Identity Disorder Services, are teenagers registered female at birth who first developed gender distress in their early teens, whereas most of the research that has been done is on young people born male who expressed discomfort from an early age. As this change in the case mix only dates to 2014 and 2015, the review says it's too early to assess the longer-term outcomes for this cohort, since young people may not reach a settled gender expression until their mid-20s. I posted this here to let you know, when I tell you that there was a huge increase in female to male as opposed to male to female, that was the traditional push. This is stating that. It's also talking about there's not enough studies, there's not enough data for long term. Now, in pharmaceutical trials, you have a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. Phase 3, when it finishes, that's when they go for approval from the FDA, for example, or the regulatory authority. Once it's approved, a lot of companies will then do a phase 4, which is observational studies. Those can last like 20 years. They're looking at long-term effects. This is all so new, we haven't been able to get to the long-term effects studies yet. We haven't been able to get to the observational studies on the effects of transgender therapy. That could be, medical, social, whatever. The whole transgender therapy profession, we don't have enough data yet to be able to tell the impacts of it. Lately, I just keep thinking to myself, some people have to learn the hard way because logically we knew this was not good. We logically knew that. But yet we see people going forward with things in our culture that don't make any sense to move forward with. We don't understand it. And then a few years after they push full steam ahead and things start coming out about how bad they were, then they'll acknowledge that it wasn't as great as they thought. Oops. Meanwhile, damage is done. And I don't understand it because I think it's just common sense. But I guess we don't have a lot of that anymore. Okay, let's look at slide 15. This is another post on the DTrans page of someone asking for help, advice. This just demonstrates kind of how sad it is when people are in this mindset. So this is a female to male saying, I'm extremely frustrated, confused, and lost. For countless times, I've considered putting a bullet through my head this week. I've had terrible fevers this month, and I don't know how, but suddenly I'm completely regretful of my transition. I feel ugly. I feel disgusting. I don't feel comfortable anymore. Anything I wear looks awful. When I first started transition, I felt happy. I got myself out there, got quite social, but now I just can't do it anymore. I've completely isolated myself. I haven't left the house in 2 months because I feel disgustingly awful. I did 2 years of testosterone and honestly not much changed, but I feel like I've ruined myself. I no longer feel that confidence I had back there in the start. Maybe I should have stayed a tomboy or something. But even after all those psychologist visits, doctors, is it possible I was wrong? I've been identifying as a male for 4 years, 2 years on testosterone, 6 months out of testosterone due to financial complications. I don't know if the estrogen is infecting my brain again or if I'm just going crazy. I just need some advice, if anything possible. I'm so scared to detransition and being made fun of for my family. Will I ever be pretty again? So much to say on that one. These are real people, by the way. Real people posting these. Number one, I think this demonstrates, because what we keep hearing is this whole statement, would you rather have a trans son or a dead daughter? Because the psychology profession loves to use that they're going to commit suicide most likely if you don't trans them. And I'm seeing the opposite now that data's coming out and now that people are detransitioning in huge numbers and they're speaking out. It's the opposite. They're claiming, a lot of them are claiming that they're more suicidal after transition than before. Why do you think that is? Because they're putting all these chemicals in that their bodies weren't designed to handle. And I think that's part of the sentiment of this person's struggle. They're pointing out that they had so many psychologist visits and doctor visits, and could they have been wrong? Of course they could, because there is a gender affirming care model that they're following. They're not questioning it. They're not doing any intense therapy or trying to figure out the root cause of the problem that you're experiencing. They're just rushing into it. So now this person's terrified to detrans. It's just heartbreaking. This one's heartbreaking to me. So we had a response. Let's look at slide 16. Somebody responded and said, the start of transition is like a honeymoon period. You get a lot of social support and the hormones make you feel invincible. I'm going to stop there for a second. In the next episode, I'm going to play you a part of a video of someone who has detransitioned, who speaks about this and talks about they were female to male and they've gone back to female now. But when they went on testosterone, it was a high. They got a high from it. Think about it. Females are typically more emotional. And she talks about how the emotions are suppressed with testosterone and you feel so much freer because women really overthink a lot of things naturally and we get emotional about things. So it suppresses that. And so it's like a high when you first start taking it. And this one talks about that. You get a lot of social support and hormones make you feel invincible. But long term, let's go back to this. Passing as a man becomes a lonely, alienating experience. The world of men is a hollow, disappointing place for someone socialized as a female, speaking for myself. When I went off testosterone, I was prone to crying, very low energy, very hopeless. I'd long since had a hysterectomy and had no natural hormones on board, and the hot flashes were horrendous. Now I have HRT, or hormone replacement therapy. I take a menopausal amount of estrogen and a microdose of testosterone levels found in women. And this is somebody's testimony as to what they experienced when they detransed. Again, just really heartbreaking. Let's go to slide 17. This is another person posting. They said, no childhood dysphoria. I was gender conforming besides being interested in guns and action movies. I had Hot Wheels, but really I liked the glittery ones and the journal act of collecting. And this is a desisted female. And desisted means they wanted to transition, but they resisted it. So they're called desisters. This is a female. Number 2, I felt awkward around the other girls, but I also felt awkward around boys. The autism spectrum disorder was underdiagnosed. So they have autism spectrum disorder. It was known I had a severe sensory processing problems, but I think my great verbal skills made them dismiss a real diagnosis. I wish I had been diagnosed and people had started working on my deficiencies like theory of mind. It took me so long to really understand what was true common knowledge that people could be given the exact same information and come to different conclusions. That to me is like baseline 101 when you're teaching kids. And it's also observational. So, number one, I think nobody mentioned that to this child. And number two, they didn't observe it, which I think is different. And that could be because of the ASD. I'm not sure. But it brings to mind something to think about. She says, I still can't quite believe I accepted the, quote, maybe you feel awkward around other girls because you're actually a boy, unquote, without just going the extra step of, quote, then why do you also feel awkward around boys, unquote. So they're getting logical at this point. Number 3, I didn't ever think about the effect early porn exposure had on me. And this brings in a whole nother discussion point. I didn't tell anyone for a long time, but I stumbled upon hardcore stuff when I was just barely starting puberty. It left me with a fear of sex from the female perspective. Being a woman during sex looked degrading. As gross as it sounds, realizing I could never have the full sexual function of a male was what helped me start snapping out of it. Really thinking about it makes me feel like some sort of pervert. And again, that was a desisted female, so they never went through the process, but they felt like a trans. Slide 18, here's another one that somebody posted, and it was a advice request. Firstly, I'm so beyond grateful that this page exists. I feel so understood. And this is on the DTrans subreddit. Anyways, the worst mistake of my 25 years was having a mastectomy with no hormones. 4 years later, and I want to erase my trans experience from my life. I've deleted all photos from social media, etc., but the one thing I can't undo is my surgery. My friend said this to me, and it had me perplexed. He said, you have the choice to let that part of your story carry into your future. He also said, I don't need to tell people or be honest about it. He suggested I lie about my surgery and say I had the breast cancer gene and that it was preventative surgery. I'm not a liar. I pride myself for being an honest person, but unfortunately that's so tempting. But I also feel like I'm disrespecting people that actually went through that. I want so badly to erase this from my story. Looking for your honest opinions. I appreciate all of them. Let's go to slide 19. Here's another post on the thread. Growing up, were you taught that men are bad? And this brings another aspect into it. I grew up with a feminist mother, and she taught me that men are dumb and violent, and we will only have world peace when no more men are in power. Basically, that women can do everything that men can do and more. Looking back, being taught that my sex is the bad sex and the opposite sex is the good sex, it's no wonder I was interested in transitioning. Have you had a similar experience? Is this common to the DTrans community? So in this case, they had a feminist parent. And it was a mom with a son, clearly. And she badmouthed men to the son all the time. And it really had an impact in making this poor guy feel like he was in the wrong sex. He wanted to be a female because he didn't believe men were good based on what his mom had told him. Here's one about the lack of ability to reproduce. Let's go to slide 20. This is female to male to female pregnancy. Advice request. She says, I'm 30 years old now and starting to think on having children with my husband, but I'm terrified of checking what is the status of my fertility or to learn if there could be any risk for me or the baby as a detransitioner. I would like to hear from other female to male detrans if a successful pregnancy is possible after 2 years of going under testosterone, or if I should lower my expectations of having biological kids. Again, very sad. These are things I just want you to know are on the other side. And hopefully, if there's somebody thinking about transitioning, don't make a decision until you know the whole picture. And know all the risks before you do it, before you decide. And hopefully you'll decide not to, because accepting yourself is your biological sex. That's who you are. Here's another post, and this is a really long one, but this one's about transition and the desire to stay a child or regress to a childlike state. This is another aspect of looking at this. So, and I'll just give you the breakdown of this one because it's really long. But there is a link in the references to this page, so you can go read it if you want. So one thing that they're talking about here is that people who want to transition, they're seeing a trend in them. Their real desire is to be a child again. And in the next episode, I'm going to talk about that because there's actually something to that. There's a study that was done around that, and it's called autopedophilia. So I'll give you the stats of that in a second, and we'll just go ahead and talk about it. But anyways, the whole point of this is there are people who desire to be a child again, and so they're actually attracted to children physically, or they transition to the opposite sex to be childlike. So I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a lot of male, how do I put it? Male to female trans people. You'll see them as drag queens a lot of times. There are people who are posting on social media and they look like little girls. One comes to mind. What's his name, Josh? Dylan Mulvaney. He's one that comes to mind immediately. They dress up like little girls and they act like little girls and they want to be little girls. Well, there's a link to pedophilia with that. But there's also, they're finding a draw for men in particular to transition to the opposite sex, but as a child because they want to be a child again. They want to be with a child, and they want to be a child to be with a child. Does that make sense? Like, it sounds so crazy to me. Autopedophilia is a sexual arousal by the idea of being a child. And in that post, they say, I can't tell if this is what these female to males are experiencing or what. It's a lot more obvious when the male to females are autopedo when they want to become little girls. It's rare, but probably not as rare as you would think. So I did some research, and there's a study that was done by Northwestern University in 2016 with 475 I'm going to try to pronounce this, hebephilic men. And what that means is men who are attracted to prepubescent and pubescent children. That was the sample control group. It ended up being 475 after the screening rejections. Out of those, 233 of them, or 49.1%, reported that they had felt at least mildly aroused when they imagined being a child or having a child's body. That's a little different aspect of this that I didn't know about until I did the research for this. And that's according to researchgate.net. The link will be below in the references, so you can go check that out yourself. Again, they're just posts on Reddit from people talking about the impacts of these things. Autism and OCD, there's one about that. And we talked about the autism connection earlier, and also in the gender ideology episode. Here's one. Well, I have a couple, and they're basically just angry towards detrans people. Well, they're expressing the anger as detrans people that they're feeling from the trans community. You'll find that out there too. And a couple of them actually refer to it. And I said this earlier, and I didn't know about this post, but I said on the gender ideology episode, I feel like it's a cult. And there are people on Reddit saying the same thing that have actually been through the process. They're saying the same thing as detrans people, and they're giving the same reasons why they came to that conclusion. Okay, so let's go to slide 28. This is according to the American College of Pediatricians. These are some of the medical issues that detrans people will feel the opposite from. So talking about puberty blockers actually cause depression and other emotional disturbances related to suicide. This goes back to what I was telling you before about people in the studies, they're finding that more people are suicidal after therapy and treatments to transition than before they transitioned. It also talks about additionally cross-sex hormones may disrupt mental health. And then in quotes, it says pre-pubertal children diagnosed with gender dysphoria may be given puberty blockers as young as 11 and will require cross-sex hormones in later adolescence to continue impersonating the opposite sex. These children will never be able to conceive any genetically related children, even via artificial reproductive technology. So no in vitro fertilization, nothing. It says, in addition, cross-sex hormones are associated with dangerous health risks, including but not limited to cardiac disease, high blood pressure, blood clots, stroke, diabetes, and cancer. And again, that's according to the American College of Pediatricians. The article is called Gender Ideology Harms Children. So in closing, I just want to reiterate, I said it last time, we live in a very sick world. We live in a world full of mental health issues. I'm seeing such an increase on that in my lifetime. I can't imagine what people older than me are thinking at this point, because it's disheartening to me to see it. It's sad. We as Christians have a responsibility to protect our children's minds. I've mentioned that before, and I'm going to keep mentioning that too. We need to be filling them with good things, helpful things, constructive things, not destructive things, and not falling into traps like in the subculture that we discussed. The struggle for detransitioners is immense, and my heart goes out to them, because I think a lot of these people that are detransitioning, they feel suckered. They feel robbed. I'm seeing that on a massive scale. And my heart goes out to them, because I think they were too. And I don't think anybody should feel that way. We should know the information. There's something called informed consent. We use it in the pharmaceutical industry, unless there's an EUA approval, because, that says you don't have to have one. But in a true approved drug, every patient is supposed to get an informed consent that tells you all the risks, all the side effects, so that you can make an informed decision about your body, about what you're going to put into it, about whether or not you want to move forward with it. But they don't get this. They don't get that with transitioning at all. I don't understand. It's all part of the medical field. Why is it not consistent? Anyways, I wanted to share the information with you to hopefully give you some real insight into what happens. I really would love to see more people change their minds about this. So if you can, and you know somebody who's going through this, be sure to share it with them so that they can see for themselves. And again, these aren't my words I'm bringing to you. I give you a little bit of my opinion, but I really strive to give you non-biased resources, because the sources will tell you themselves what you need to know and help you just kind of critically think through them. It's not me saying this stuff. It's them saying that about their own initiatives. I also think it's important to have brutal, honest dialogue in these shows, or monologue, however you want to look at it. Hopefully it'll be dialogue if you put a comment below or even a question, something. But anyways, I think it's important to be brutally honest with people about it, because there are pros and cons. I feel this way about everything. If an adult knows the pros and cons, whatever decision they make, I can support it more because I know they're educated about it. I may not agree with it, but at least they did the work to figure out what those pros and cons are and make an educated decision. And then they have their own rationale, and I'm just going to listen to it, right? I want that to happen with this whole topic. The content is so hard to research because it's heartbreaking and sad, and it's hard to present it to, but my main concern again is about the children. I just want parents to be informed. So again, in the next episode, I'm going to have some video interviews we're going to look at. We'll import some other information to share with you about how the detransitioners are being captured, what they're going through, and so on and so forth. Again, if you like the content, you can find it on YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, Facebook, iTunes, Spotify, pretty much any app you might want to use. Share it with people. Follow, like, subscribe. Make sure you subscribe to revolverbroadcasting.com. Thank you for Revolver supporting this platform for me. And make sure that you're looking at the other content on revolver.com too, revolverbroadcasting.com. Because there's other cool shows too. And make sure you subscribe, share, like, click the notification bell. Make sure you're notified of all of the episodes that come out, because I hope you're finding information very helpful about it. And with that, I'm going to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.